My name is Hannah Henderson. I'm 32 years old. Last Thanksgiving, in our Buckhead mansion, my mother raised her crystal glass before 14 people, family, neighbors, and the city's social elite and said, "One daughter is a high-stakes corporate litigator. The other one? Well, she makes sure the sheets are tucked for a living." Everyone laughed. My sister, Madison, smirked. My father, Christopher, looked at his plate. I didn't say a word. I just kept refilling water glasses. It was the final litmus test, and they failed. Welcome to Turning Tables Stories. Sitting here with my matcha latte, watching the world go by, I realize how much clarity follows a lifetime of toxic silence. Where are you watching from, and what's your favorite drink right now? I look forward to your comments. But as the laughter faded that night, I was finally done being weak. I didn't slam the silver pitcher down. I didn't scream. I didn't even allow a single tear to compromise my makeup. In the world of Buckhead old money, a scene is a sign of weakness, and I was finished being weak. I placed the pitcher on the sideboard with a soft, clinical clink, the sound of a closing account. I walked out of that dining room, through the foyer where the massive family portrait hung, the one I wasn't even in, and stepped into the cool Atlanta night. I drove away in my silver sedan, watching the glowing lights of the family estate vanish in my rearview mirror. By the time I reached my own apartment at 11:51 p.m., the adrenaline had settled into a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of a perfect life. And tonight, I realized the subscription was no longer worth the cost. I opened my laptop. The screen's glow was the only light in the room, reflecting the sharp precision of my next moves. I didn't call them. I didn't block their numbers. That's what emotional people do. Instead, I began deactivating the ghost services I had managed for them for nearly a decade. First was the private security subscription for my mother's jewelry collection, $300,000 worth of diamonds and heritage gold that I had insured and monitored. Canceled. Next, I moved to my father's accounts. The premium maintenance plan for his luxury car collection, the one that kept his fleet pristine without him ever lifting a finger. Terminated. I moved with a rhythmic, mechanical speed. By 12:0 to 3 a.m., I had severed the digital umbilical cord. The automatic bill pay for the Buckhead Mansion's utilities, the private landscaping crew that kept the bougainvillea looking like a magazine cover, and the concierge grocery service, all gone. I wasn't being petty. I was simply withdrawing my management. I was letting them face the reality they didn't know how to operate. For 31 years, my compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted. They saw a maid. They saw the help. They never stopped to ask how the house stayed standing or why the bills never arrived. They assumed it was their status that kept the world turning. They were about to find out that status doesn't pay the electric bill. I leaned back as the last confirmation email pinged. My father's name was off the primary dashboard. My sister's legal subscriptions, which she'd funneled through my business account to save on taxes, were flagged for immediate review. Everything stayed silent for hours. But in my head, my mother's toast kept echoing. The other one cleans houses. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a hint of regret, but there was only a profound sense of lightness. I had officially stepped out of the role of the good daughter. The test was over, and the real accounting was just beginning. One daughter is a litigator, the other cleans houses. My mother's words are a recurring charge on my soul. They see a girl with a silver pitcher, but my true net worth is written in contracts they aren't even qualified to read. I am the founder and CEO of a lifestyle management empire, currently generating $3,800,000 in annual revenue. While my family slept in their 300 thread count sheets, I was the one auditing their chaos and quietly fixing the structural failures they were too arrogant to notice. I grew up in the shadows of their demands, and it taught me the most valuable lesson in business. People will tell you everything if they think you're too unimportant to understand. I watched the elite of Buckhead fall apart in private, and then I charged them a premium to put the pieces back together. My family thinks they own me because they gave me a name, but I own the infrastructure of their lives. I remember the day the official family portrait was unveiled. It hangs in the grand foyer, encased in a gold leaf frame that cost more than my first car. In the original sitting, I stood on the far left, my fingers resting on the mahogany back of my father's chair. When the final canvas arrived, I was gone. There was just a smooth, empty space where I had been. Amanda had called the photographer and instructed him to edit me out. She said my ordinary presence didn't fit the Buckhead aesthetic she was trying to project. This is the trap of normalizing cruelty that defines our world. In high society dynamics, a family requires a scapegoat to maintain its halo. By treating my presence as a flaw to be corrected, they reinforce their own sense of superiority. They didn't see me as a daughter, they saw me as a defect. And after 20 years, they'd done it so often that the cruelty felt like a tradition. They also never questioned where the help actually came from. 2 years ago, my father's prestigious accounting firm was 48 hours away from a public tax lien. He'd mismanaged a series of corporate filings, and the state was ready to move in. I didn't confront him. I simply authorized a transfer of $650,000 from my personal savings to clear the massive tax lien. I protected his dignity while he sat at the dinner table and told me I was a phase, not a future. I sat in my apartment now, the blue light of my laptop screen, the only thing illuminating my living room. I rubbed my eyes, thinking about that $6,500. Back then, it was every penny I had. I sacrificed my own security to keep his ego intact. But that was the old Hannah, the one who believed that if I worked hard enough in the background, they would eventually let me into the light. I realized tonight that the light they offer is artificial. I've built my own sun, and it's fueled by $3,800,000 of cold, hard independence. The ghost has finally left the mansion, and without the ghost to hold the walls up, the house of cards is going to fall very, very fast. I still have the receipt for the 30-year anniversary party, not for the catering or the decorations, but for the $150 lesson in family branding that I bought myself. It was 3 years ago, a month before I realized that my sister, Madison, was being groomed to be the sole face of the Henderson legacy while I was being treated as the fine print. I spent 6 weeks sourcing that bottle. It was a rare vintage, a wine that carried the kind of history my father, Christopher, pretended to value. I thought that if I brought something of undeniable quality, they would have to acknowledge the person who brought it. I was still thinking in terms of emotional returns on investment back then. I was still a novice in the business of my own family. The mansion on that night smelled like gardenias and expensive perfume. I walked into the kitchen, the one room where I was always allowed to exist without scrutiny, and handed the bottle to my mother. Amanda didn't even look at the vintage. She looked at me, then at the bottle, and her face tightened. It was the look a director gives an extra who accidentally stepped into a lead actor's light. She didn't say thank you. She didn't ask where I found it. She simply slid that $150 bottle under the counter, deep into the darkness behind the heavy-duty cleaning supplies. It was a clinical execution of my effort. In its place, she pulled out a crate of cheap, mass-produced wine from a charity vineyard. Madison was the new public face for that charity. It was a calculated move. Every glass poured that night was a silent advertisement for my sister's benevolence. The guests weren't there to celebrate 30 years of a marriage. They were there to witness the launch of Madison Henderson as the premier socialite of Buckhead. Standing in that kitchen, watching my mother meticulously arrange the cheap labels so they would be visible to the photographers, I had my first moment of true accounting. My invisibility wasn't an accident. It wasn't a side effect of my quiet nature or my ordinary interests. It was a deliberate, coordinated marketing strategy. They needed me to stay in the shadows because my presence complicated the narrative. Madison was the product they were selling to the world, polished, perfect, and elite. I was the overhead they were trying to hide. I was the labor that kept the lights on, the silent partner who cleaned up the spills so the star could keep dancing. I realized then that our family was a corporation, and I was being phased out of the merger. They had already decided that my only value was as a service provider, not a shareholder. The other daughter wasn't a mistake. She was a necessary contrast. They needed my Maid energy to make Madison's litigator energy feel like a miracle. The anger I felt that night wasn't loud. It didn't make me want to throw the cheap wine at the white silk curtains. It was cold. It was clinical. It was the feeling of a CEO looking at a failing department and realizing it was time to cut the losses. If they wanted me to be a ghost, I would be the most efficient ghost they'd ever encountered. I would let them have their stage, their cheap wine, and their manufactured reputation. But I would own the theater. I would own the ground they stood on. And when I eventually pulled the plug, they would realize too late that the star of the show never actually knew how to turn on the lights. The reaction came 3 days later, delivered not by a phone call or a text, but by a thick, cream-colored envelope left at my door. It was the kind of stationery that practically screams litigation. I didn't even need to open it to know it was from Madison's firm. My sister didn't do apologies. She did depositions. I sat at my kitchen island and sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener. The letterhead was embossed, the language cold and saturated with legal jargon. It was a formal cease and desist. Madison was accusing me of willful financial sabotage and malicious interference with the Henderson family estate. She claimed that my sudden withdrawal of oversight was a breach of fiduciary duty and that I was unlawfully withholding administrative access to their private accounts. I leaned back, a small, dry smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. It was a classic Madison move. In her world, if you can't control someone with affection, you control them with a court order. She was trying to frame my independence as a crime. She couldn't fathom a world where I simply walked away, so she had to invent a narrative where I was a fugitive. But the letter was just the opening salvo. By that afternoon, the Buckhead gossip machine was in full gear. I started receiving concerned messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, members of my mother's garden club, former classmates, and the city's social elite. Madison wasn't just sending letters. She was on a public relations tour. She was at the Piedmont Driving Club, over afternoon tea and cucumber sandwiches, whispering that I was having a mental breakdown. She told anyone who would listen that I had developed a disturbing obsession with the family's finances and that I had been stealing from our mother's private accounts to fund a failing business. It was a systematic assassination of my character. In Buckhead, reputation is the only currency that matters, and Madison was trying to bankrupt me before I could even take the stage. She was weaponizing the very invisibility she had forced on me for 30 years. To the world, I was the quiet, unstable sister who had finally snapped. I listened to a voicemail from one of Amanda's church friends, her voice dripping with that manufactured Southern pity. "Oh, Hannah, darling, we heard you're going through such a difficult time. Madison is just heartbroken. She says you've been taking things that don't belong to you. We're praying for your recovery, honey." I didn't delete the message. I saved it. Every lie Madison told, every prayer sent my way based on a fabrication, was just more data for my ledger. This wasn't a family feud anymore. It was a hostile takeover of my reputation. Madison thought she was the only litigator in the room, but she forgot one fundamental rule of engagement: never attack an opponent when you don't know their true market value. She thought she was crushing a lowly service girl. She didn't realize she was declaring war on a woman who held the keys to the very kingdom she was trying to protect. The Buckhead gossip machine was loud, but facts are louder. And my laptop was currently glowing with enough facts to silence the entire city. Madison thinks she's winning because she's the loudest person in the room. But in my business, the loudest person is usually the one with the most to lose. I didn't respond to her legal threats with a lawyer, not yet. I responded with an invoice. I picked up my phone and called Tyler, Madison's husband. Tyler is a man who values his board seats significantly more than his marriage vows, and 6 months ago, his corporation had a problem that required a very specific kind of scrubbing. He didn't know I was the CEO. He only knew that a woman named H. Elizabeth had delivered a flawless resolution for a $600,000 fee. When I called his private line, the silence on the other end was absolute. I didn't open with a greeting. I opened with a statement of fact. I told him that his wife's public smear campaign was creating a significant conflict of interest. I told him that if my reputation was compromised, my non-disclosure agreements regarding his firm's scrubbing might be legally scrutinized in my own defense. The panic in his voice was clinical. He knew that if Madison's pride cost him that $600,000 contract or worse, the secrets it protected his career in Buckhead would be over before the next board meeting. He begged me for time. I gave him 24 hours to manage his domestic situation. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a foreclosure notice on their peace of mind. That afternoon, I drove to a nondescript, high-security office in Midtown to meet the only other person the Hendersons had tried to delete. Aunt Sarah. She had been the original other daughter, the one my mother, Amanda, had excised from the family tree 20 years ago for having too much temperament. In Henderson language, that meant she was too smart to be controlled. Sarah was now an elite forensic accountant who specialized in unmasking the financial skeletons of the wealthy. We sat in her glass-walled office, the Atlanta skyline stretching out behind her like a grid of possibilities. I laid out the digital records I'd salvaged from my father's accounts before I cut the cord. Sarah didn't look at me. She looked at the numbers. Her eyes moved with the same mechanical precision mine did. She was looking for the structural failure in the Henderson legacy, and she found it in less than 20 minutes. She tapped a finger on a line item from 2 years ago. It was an entry in the family's primary trust, a trust I was supposed to have equal access to. She pointed to a withdrawal of $400,000. The authorization form was attached. It bore my name. It bore my signature. But I had never seen that document, and I certainly had never seen that money. Sarah leaned back, her expression as cold as the marble in my mother's foyer. She told me that this wasn't just a discrepancy or a mistake. This was a signature mismatch, so blatant it was insulting. Someone had forged my name to pillage my own inheritance. As she scrolled deeper, the pattern became clear. There were more entries, more authorizations I never made. My father, Christopher, the man who looked at his plate while my mother mocked me, hadn't just been avoiding the conflict. He'd been financing his own secret failures with my future. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a criminal enterprise. My old money family had a very new, very modern felony problem. Sarah looked at me and asked what I wanted to do. I didn't hesitate. I told her to prepare the full audit. The Hendersons wanted to treat me like a maid. Fine. I was going to clean house, and I was going to start by taking out the trash. The setting for the Buckhead Environmental Gala was a study in choreographed perfection. 600 people moved through the ballroom of the street. Regis, a sea of silk, diamonds, and orchestrated laughter that smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. My mother, Amanda, and my sister, Madison, were in the front row, preening for the society photographers. They were the self-appointed queens of this world, waiting to be acknowledged for a minor contribution they'd likely billed to a family account I was no longer managing. They didn't see me enter. In the world of high society, I had been the ghost for so long that they'd forgotten I had a physical form. I wasn't wearing my Maid uniform tonight. I was wearing a navy blue couture gown that cost more than Madison's German SUV. It was structured, sharp, and entirely paid for by a business they'd spent years calling a cleaning phase. The master of ceremonies stepped to the podium, and the room went silent. Tonight, he began, his voice echoing off the gold leaf ceiling, we recognize a leader who has redefined the meaning of the silent partner. A strategist whose firm has not only mastered the art of discreet high-net-worth logistics, but has quietly managed the private lives and complex estates of our city's most influential leaders. I watched Madison lean over to whisper something to Amanda, a smirk playing on her lips, likely a joke about the help someone must have hired to organize such an event. Please welcome the recipient of our Legacy Award, The founder and CEO of Pristine Lifestyle Management, the MC, announced. Hannah Elizabeth Henderson. The spotlight didn't just find me, it felt like it had been hunting for me. I walked onto that stage with the rhythmic precision of a woman who had calculated every step. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of 600 people realizing the hierarchy had just flipped. I looked down at the front row. Amanda's face was the color of unpolished silver. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting toward the cameras she had been courting all evening. Madison looked frozen, her corporate litigator mask shattering into 1,000 pieces of pure, unadulterated shock. They weren't just seeing me, they were seeing the $3,800,000 I represented. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at table 14. I looked at the man who had forged my name for $40,000 to pay for a gambling addiction he thought I was too ordinary to notice. I want to thank the Southwest Council for this honor, I said, my voice steady, calm, and clinical. And I want to thank those who taught me that the most powerful thing a woman can be is invisible. You taught me to see everything while being seen as nothing. You taught me that a maid is just someone who knows where all the trash is hidden. As the room erupted into a standing ovation that lasted 47 seconds, I stepped off the stage. I didn't wait for the applause to end. I walked straight to Amanda. She stood up, her eyes red, her voice a frantic, high-pitched whisper meant to save her reputation before the journalists closed in. Hannah, darling, she hissed, reaching for my arm. We didn't know. We need to talk. Family unity. We can fix this. Just tell the press we were in on the surprise. I didn't let her touch me. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single, folded document, the audit report Sarah had prepared. I pressed it into her trembling hand. You spent Thanksgiving telling the world I was the help, Mom, I whispered, my voice as cold as the ice in her champagne glass. So I'm going to do my job one last time. I'm here to help you pack. You see, you've been 90 days delinquent, and I was the only one secretly paying the bank to stay away. I stopped that on Thursday. The foreclosure notice on the Buckhead estate arrives on Monday. I walked past them without looking back. Behind me, I could hear the sound of the Henderson legacy finally hitting the floor. It sounded like breaking glass. And for the first time in 32 years, the air was perfectly clear. Christopher's world collapsed under the weight of the audit. The forgery charges were just the first domino to fall. Within weeks, the prestigious accounting firm he had spent 40 years building was being dismantled by forensic investigators. He didn't just lose the Buckhead estate, he lost the one thing he valued more than his inheritance, his name. Madison tried to play the victim one last time, but the narrative had shifted too far for her litigator mask to hide the cracks. Tyler filed for divorce. The moment my legal team lifted the non-disclosure agreement regarding his firm's crisis, he realized that his marriage was the only liability he couldn't scrub away. The Buckhead mansion was listed for sale on a gray Monday morning to cover the debts my father had stacked up like a deck of cards. I watched from a distance as the movers carried out the heavy silk curtains and that gold leaf family portrait, the one where I was a smooth, empty space. I didn't feel a surge of triumph as the for sale sign was hammered into the lawn. I simply felt the quiet satisfaction of a completed audit. I wasn't the one who destroyed them. I just stopped propping up the structural failures of their lives. This is the seed sower's justice. While they were busy trying to salt the earth I stood on, I was busy planting a garden they couldn't reach. My success wasn't built on their ruin. It was built on the skills I honed while they ignored me. I am no longer the ghost in the mansion or the girl refilling water glasses. I am the architect of my own life, standing in a quiet office, overlooking a city that finally sees me. I've come to realize that for 31 years, I was waiting for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that your family's inability to see your value is a reflection of their blindness, not a lack of your light. Being the black sheep usually just means you're the only one who realized the flock was headed toward a cliff. To those of you who have always felt like you were standing on the edge, looking in, stop asking for permission to exist fully. Forgiveness isn't always an invitation to reconcile. Sometimes it's just the final signature on a contract that sets you free. You don't owe your loyalty to a bloodline that treats you like a resource instead of a human being. The most powerful thing you can do is walk away and build something beautiful in the silence they left behind. One day, they'll see. But by that point, you'll be so busy shining that you won't even notice them watching from the shadows. If you've ever been the invisible one in your family, I want to hear from you. I want to know how you found your voice and how you built your own sun. Drop a comment below and let's start a conversation about what it really means to be free. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our community of people who are choosing to build a life on their own terms. Thank you for listening, and thank you for finally seeing me.